Moving on, our next session is a topic which is quite relevant today on how to be the long distance leader. Presenting the session, I have with me Kevin Mills, who's a business coach with Action Coach USA and is a firm owner. He works with business owners from all industry who are interested in growing profits and building a self-directed and sustainable business, and excel at leading and managing complex cross-functional projects that enable visibility to process gaps and drive the appropriate correction actions leading to better performance. He has a background in the fields of aerospace, energy, chemicals, plastics, and continuous discrete manufacturing. With this, I call upon Kevin Mills to take this session forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I am honored to be presenting to you today from my home office here in Houston, Texas. I'm sure all of you are also probably working and watching from your home locations. I'm going to start to share my screen and make sure that this comes up properly. Okay, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen? Just before I get started, I want to make sure everything's looking.
Yes, we can share. We can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So the topic I'm going to speak on today is around virtual leadership. And as we all think about the current economic crisis that we're in today, we're all leading our teams virtually, not by choice, but by mandate. And I truly believe the practice of leading remotely is going to continue beyond the current economic crisis. So the information I will share is relevant both today and thereafter as we lead our teams remotely. So let me go ahead and jump into the information. And I've got a lot of material to cover, and I'm going to go through it fairly quickly to keep within our time constraints. But if there's any questions or comments, feel free to type those in, and we should have time at the end to address those and have some discussion time. So an overview of what we'll go through today is how to lead remotely. And it really is thinking about the same fundamental principles of leadership, but applying them in a different way. And it requires more influence on our part than it does command. We will learn about the 3O model and how it works together along with the remote leadership model to create an effective methodology for leading our teams. And then finally, we'll touch on maintaining a servant leadership mindset as we lead our teams. So as we start with mindset, I thought this quote was quite appropriate. The mind has a powerful way of attracting things that are in harmony with it, both good and bad. So our mindset is important as we approach the process of leading our teams. So I want to take a quick poll, and you can just type your answers in here. But where is your mindset today, right now? Are you feeling inspired or optimistic? Hopeful as we come out of this crisis? Or are you still in a position of being concerned, anxious, or even in some cases fearful? I'm just curious to see kind of where people are right now with mindset. So thank you for typing those in. All right, so looking at rule number 1, the principle of leading first and making sure that leadership comes first, location is second. And don't let the distance distract you from the fundamentals of leading your people. The timeless principles of leadership really don't change. It's the application. So as you think about leading from a distance, leading remotely, these are 4 common questions that I think we all ask ourselves as leaders. One is, how do we know people are really working if we can't see them, if we're not in proximity with them in person? Secondly, Are people getting enough social interaction in a virtual work environment? Number three, are we getting good feedback when we need to consider different options and look at different directions? And fourth, can we be as effective as when we're co-located together? These are all valid questions that we're going to address today. So looking at rule number two, leading remotely requires us to lead differently. And if you look at the statistics, 80% of white-collar managers have at least one direct report who works in a different location. This was, of course, a statistic before the economic crisis. I think now it's 100% of us. As we come out of this, I think that that percentage is still going to stay very high because we've realized that we can be effective and productive working remotely. There are two major repercussions for leaders. One is in a remote environment, our methods of communication have changed. No longer do we get face-to-face communication, in-person communication. And as a leader, our sense of isolation has increased, which is important to consider. So the actual act of leading and leadership has not changed that much. We need to do the same things, but we just need to do them in a different way and using a different set of tools. So rule number three talks about working remotely and how it changes our interpersonal dynamics with our team. Being seen is very critical in leadership and will always suffer in a remote setting. So how do we make ourselves seen? Virtual communication also changes our interpersonal communication and interpersonal relationships that we have. We're losing that face-to-face nonverbal feedback. And if you look at communication science, it will say that up to 80% of communication is nonverbal. It's really around tone and body language. And in a remote environment, we lose the body language nonverbal cues that we typically get in a face-to-face setting. And so it reduces the effectiveness of that communication, both from leader to team member and team member back to leader. So we have to ensure our message is easily understood, and we have to find other ways to receive those critical cues, those critical nonverbal cues from your audience. So rule number four is looking at technology as a tool and not as a barrier. So we're going to look at three different gears and how they are working together to create effective leadership. And it depicts really these three areas, starting with leadership and management. And that's really the largest gear that's based on the fundamental part of leading remotely. And it's really based on our fundamental leadership behaviors and those fundamental principles that were applicable before the crisis and are still applicable today. The second gear, that medium-sized gear, represents tools and technology, where leaders may not be comfortable using new tools and new technology, which can impact the effectiveness of their leadership. If you're not comfortable with a Zoom meeting, or if you're not comfortable with communicating via video chat, whether it's in a group setting or individual setting, that can negatively impact your effectiveness. And then the smallest gear is around the skills and the impact. And that can cause really the biggest problems, is that smallest gear. So we have to choose the appropriate tool, because that's going to be critical to our effectiveness in leading our teams. Rule 5 looks at leading using what's called the 3O model. And I'm going to start with the first O is around outcomes. Make sure our leadership has a purpose of reaching a desired outcome, and that message is clearly communicated to the team. Some barriers in a remote setting include isolation, the lack of environmental cues, and the reduction in the repetition of that message. They're not getting that message as frequently as they would if they were co-located with you. The second O is around others. Lead with and through your people. So you're going to be more influential when you focus on others. And that really speaks to the servant leadership process in leading. Team members are going to be more engaged when you focus on them and you make it about them. And then the third O is around ourselves. What are our own beliefs and assumptions in our ability to lead? Who you are and how you lead is important no matter where your people work. And if you notice the sequence of the three O's, notice outcomes and others comes before ourselves, really pointing to that servant leadership principle. Rule number 6 is leading successfully really requires achieving goals of many different types. First of all, we want organizational outcomes, which means creating clear targets and frequent discussion with the team. Also, we need team outcomes. People need to know how what they do each day fits into the work and the success of the entire team. It's easier now for team members to lose sight of the big picture and also to lose sight of how their role fits into the success of the team. And then the third area is around personal and individual outcomes and developing those goals and expectations with them, each individual team member, establishing rules for working together, how to gain their support and gain their input to the process, and describing for them what good communication looks like in this new remote environment. So it's important to develop electronic dashboards, online project reports, making them clearly visible and shared with the team so that everyone is on the same page in terms of what are the outcomes and goals, both collectively and individually. Rule 7 is focus on achieving those goals, not just setting the goals. So make all metrics, KPIs, and dashboards shared and visible to the team and avoid surprises. Of course, you heard in the last presentation was around goals being SMART, making sure they're specific, measurable, achievable, or results-oriented, and time-bound. The other three areas that are important around goals is being able to establish the quantity components of the work, understanding the time factor into the success of that work, and then how is quality to be measured for that work that's being done. All of these are going to be critical for you to discuss with your team and have input from them. And then also another rule of thumb that's important, especially in a remote setting, is set measurements in smaller chunks so that you can be more effective identifying and addressing any delays or risks. As you break the work down into smaller pieces and set goals and checkpoints for each of those milestones, you're better able to understand progress or lack thereof and make adjustments and course corrections as needed. Rule 8 is then coaching your team regardless of where they work. And coaching is around the fact of as you coached your team in the past face to face, the interaction needs to be very conscious and intentional. This is always something that most leaders feel like they can improve upon is how they are able to coach their team to make them better, to develop them. So 2 reasons coaching remotely is going to be more complicated and stressful as you work to coach your team is that the interaction is going to require more effort on your part. And there are new obstacles that don't exist when you're in person. So you have to work to overcome those. And the communication process using technology creates a new set of mental and social obstacles that did not exist in a co-located environment. So make sure your conversation is a two-way conversation. Make sure you're not the one doing most of the talking with your team. And develop great questions to start the dialogue. This really helps your team open up to you with honest and transparent communication without you coming to them in a presumptive position around trying to coach them. And then it's always a good rule of thumb to follow up after a coaching discussion to confirm the message. Make sure that what you said, they heard in the same way. And you know, you can probably, everyone has a great example of a communication dialogue that happened over text, which is probably the least effective method of communication, and where the message was not received and accepted based on how you had intended it to be communicated. So this is going to be common in a remote setting, is making sure and confirming the message was received. Rule 9 is to communicate in ways that work best for others rather than your personal preference. So this really gets down to understanding your team's DISC profile. DISC is an assessment of behavior tendencies, and being able to identify that for each of your team members. I certainly highly recommend that you perform DISC assessments for your team to be able to understand their DISC profile and communicate what as DISC defines as using the platinum rule for style and method of communication. So if you think about the golden rule is changed here to mean treat others the way they want to be treated, again, based on their DISC profile. So utilize DISC to help identify where your team members, first of all, work well together, and also where there could be sources of challenge in behavior styles across team members, and making sure to get ahead of that. And then ask people how they want to work with you. Use neutral questions and be open and transparent with them. How frequently do they want to be communicated with? Is it daily or twice a week? How many touch points? And also make sure they understand how they can effectively get in contact with you if there is an issue or a problem. And then rule 10, leading successfully requires an understanding of what people are thinking, not just what they're doing. So leaders need to see and they need to be seen. So make sure you understand how you gather information that's needed to understand what's going on within the organization. Make sure that that's a very broad process of gathering information in your discovery process. And you're not going to just a few team members to get that information. It means asking more people and scanning more sources to get a more complete view of the landscape of what's happening. And that's going to be more difficult and require more effort in a remote setting. Secondly, make sure you are being seen as the leader. How is your team getting information about you and from you as their leader? And then be more aware of the impressions that you're making with your team. Ask for feedback. Make sure the message is being heard. And are you visible to your team? And what are they seeing from you when they do see you, right? In making sure that they don't only see one side of your leadership when you are visible to them. So a quick survey, and I wanted to just touch on your business today. What is your greatest business challenge right now? If you can type in, as you think about where you are in the middle of this crisis, hopefully we're all planning, preparing for a reopen event. But what is your greatest business challenge? Is it around team? Is it around time management? Could it be systems and technology and navigating this virtual world that we're in? Could it be just generally generating sales or managing cash flow? Or is it around profitability? I'd be interested to see your responses there in the chat. All right, so let's continue on, and we're about halfway through. So we're going to go through the remaining 10 rules of virtual leadership. So number 11 is building trust at a distance, and knowing that that doesn't just happen by accident. Building trust requires intentional effort, and it's harder to build in a virtual environment, and it's much more easily broken. So 3 components necessary for building high levels of trust in your organization is number 1, have a common purpose. Do you and your team have the same purpose and goal in mind? Number 2 is around competence. Do you believe the people you lead are competent? If you lack confidence in your team, it's going to impact your ability to build trust with them and vice versa, for them to have trust in you. And then third, what are the motives of your team? Are they willing to go the extra mile? Have you instilled that confidence as their leader for them to take that extra mile for you? And then understanding that the more alignment you have across these 3 components, the more trust will exist. So some great examples of building trust with a remote team is, as you have team meetings, try showcasing one person at each meeting, letting them present on their work or their project, right? Allow praise to take place in that public setting, praising your team members, and then also work to delegate in that public setting, in that team meeting. Delegate effectively and make sure you reflect the perception of fairness as you delegate work. That will, all those things will help you to build and gain trust with your team. Rule 12 is that identify the leadership role results that you need. So that means selecting the right communication tool to achieve those results. Communication needs to be effective and appropriate and find the right balance between richness and scope. Richness is really defined as one-to-one communication, the level of tone and expression and body language that you have, and the word choice that you use. Those all define richness. Scope of communication is defined as how broadly that communication needs to reach your audience. Great examples of broad communication are emails, newsletters, recorded messages. All of these provide a broad reach, but oftentimes the broader your communication, the lower richness that you have in that communication. So that's why it is difficult to manage both of those and try to get a balance. You need to be mindful of the message you're trying to get across, who you're communicating to, and how richly that message needs to be communicated. Rule 13, maximize your tool's capability or you'll minimize your effectiveness. So what does that mean? Use the technology you have at your disposal. Choosing the right tool for the right job is going to be extremely important in a remote setting. Examples here are video and recorded message. That really does help add a visual component to your communication, and it helps with those nonverbal cues and becomes probably the most effective method of virtual communication. Create common file locations, and this allows you to have a permanent, accessible central warehouse for information to be stored and accessed by your team. Email is a great tool for broad reach communication and also recorded information, but it also, as we discussed, you're going to lose that richness, and it really is only a one-way communication. It doesn't allow for that dialogue to occur. Webcam and video chat is also an extremely effective way for remote communication. And then text messaging is mostly effective for those urgent, timely communication requirements where there needs to be a quick, immediate response. And then finally, telephone and conference calls are definitely less effective options for our one-to-one communication. But what's interesting is I think before the crisis, many of us in business relied on conference calls almost exclusively for communicating with our teams if they weren't with us in person. I think today that trend is shifting now more toward webcam video chat through Zoom or GoToMeeting or other tools, and we're finding how effective that is, and I believe that trend will continue thereafter as we come out of this crisis. So moving into Rule 14, We want to seek feedback from our team to serve the outcomes we're after and to serve others and ourselves. So we want to start with, as we look to gather feedback, start with existing evidence. As we go through a discovery process, don't go to your team empty-handed. Don't come to them completely clueless about the issue. Try to arm yourself with some historical facts of what's going on as you're seeking feedback. Then identify people that you trust. Create a team of trusted advisors within your team or even outside of your own organization. And then also make sure you're asking open-ended questions, being transparent and honest, and not coming from a presumptive position. Having the conversations as richly as possible and be patient as you collect information from your team. And then have the conversations over time, allowing for your team to prepare with information that's needed to be able to communicate and share effectively. Rule 15, examine your beliefs and your self-talk. So this is really looking inwardly at your own beliefs about yourself as a leader. And it really is around how you define yourself. Good leaders require a relatively healthy self-image. So a few warning signs we need to watch out for in our self-talk are some of these statements. You're an idiot. That's the worst idea ever. Or I just can't do this. Or I'm a fraud and I will be exposed. I think all of this self-talk becomes more relevant in a remote setting, and it's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that we examine and assess. So ways to address what I call the self-talk monster is, number one, check your assumptions. Are they accurate? Make sure you're accepting positive feedback as valid. And also reach out to others, get help from others in how to be an effective leader. Rule 16, also remember it's important to accept that you can't do it all. So don't have the superhero complex. And the superhero complex is really around where you dive in and try to fix everything for your people. And by doing that, you really are not building confidence in your team by fixing their problems. So it's about teaching them to solve problems and to figure it out. So it's finding a balance between being responsible to your organization and taking care of yourself, which is extremely important right now. Look at the organization's process and workflow. Make sure that you're able to delegate work effectively and equally across your team. Identify areas where your team members can handle some of the activities that you're doing today. And then making sure that you can train them. There's a process in place so that what the activity they're doing is completed consistently and reliably, and that then you can delegate with confidence. And then looking at Rule 17, following along that delegation process is teach your team how to take responsibility. So I want to spend some time here just quickly walking through the steps to achieving responsibility. And if you think about it, it's less about, responsibility is less about a character trait, and it's more about the mental process we go through to achieve ownership of our actions by taking responsibility. So this process really does walk us through how we often navigate our own thoughts about taking responsibility. And the better we understand this, the better we'll be able to help our teams go through the same process. So typically, when we are addressed with a problem or a crisis or something goes wrong, we often go through these different mindset stages, starting with denial. Denial is something where we ignore the existence of something that's happened, especially when it's something bad. So I think in this crisis, all of us probably fell into the denial stage at the beginning. As we started to understand the significance of the issue, then we start to go into the mindset of blaming, where we hold others at fault for causing something to happen. Then we can move into the justify mindset, where we use excuses for things being the way they are, again, falling below the point of finding excuses, blame, and then finally shame is where we look inwardly at ourselves and we blame ourselves and feel guilt for whatever failure or whatever issue is happening. And this is where we become the hero of our own story, by looking inward. And oftentimes we can move from shame into a mindset of quitting, to give up, to avoid the pain of that shame and avoid the burden of obligation to resolve it. So obligation is a mindset that many of us get stuck in, where we do what we should or have to do instead of what we want to do. I think a lot of us are raised all the way from grade school through college, university, and even in the workforce, where we feel of obligation to do certain things to achieve certain outcomes. And that is really defined as an unhealthy mindset to be in, because our languaging then becomes one of I have to do or I need to do these things. And what we want to do is move that to the next level, which is one of owning your achievement, owning your outcomes, owning your goals. And that is from a position of taking responsibility, where you're truly owning your ability and power to create, to choose, and to attract. And so now your languaging moves from I need to or I have to now I choose to, I commit to doing these things. And it's just a much healthier position to start from. And it's really around three key areas to do that: around intention, awareness, and confront. So in intention is to make sure we respond from a position of responsibility when things go wrong. Awareness is catching ourselves when we fall into one of the other coping stages that we see there. And then confronting is facing ourselves to see what is really true that we can learn from, make corrections, and improve upon, again, from a position of mindset. Responsibility must be chosen and it cannot be delegated. And that's going to be really important as you assign work and responsibility to your teams. Rule 18, balance your priorities to be a remarkable long-distance leader. Know the difference between self-preservation and selfishness. And knowing your values determine how you decide what is truly important. Everyone has the same amount of time every day. So the question is, how are you going to leverage that time and make the best use of it? So it's really around choice management, not time management. And knowing that your values allow you to prioritize those activities. Rule 19 is ensuring your leadership development prepares long-distance leaders. So you want to develop your team so that they become leaders also in this journey. So what kind of organization do you want to be? What's the culture that you're looking for? And then understanding the behaviors you want from those leaders and what are the gaps that need to be filled. And then third is, what is your plan for developing those leaders, and how would the organization support those remote team members? And then the last one, rule number 20, this is the most important one, is to go back and to remember rule number 1, leadership first, location second. So as leaders, we need to do the same things. We just need to apply them in a different way. The new normal coming out of the COVID-19 crisis will result in more remote teams, not less. So we as leaders, we need to lead in our business and in our communities. So my challenge to you is to go lead and lead effectively with your remote teams. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back over, and thank you. I tremendously appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and open it up to any questions or comments that we might have.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for the insightful session. But I guess in the interest of time, we'll have to move on to the next session because we have the other speaker waiting up. But we have already received a lot of questions, which we will mailing it to you, and you can get in touch with them and advise them the way forward.
Okay, perfect. No problem.
Uh, thank you so much, Kevin, and I'm extremely sorry for the inconvenience, but it was just in the interest of time. And
Okay, no problem.
thank you so much for putting this together for us and making the effort of joining us for the summit and giving a very insightful talk. As a
All right.
token of appreciation, we have a small e-certificate for you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to having you on the other summits as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.